Hi, this is Paul, and this is Sunday Leftovers. I was going to sit down right away and do the question and answer from the Douglas Murray N.T. Wright conversation, but I do this sometimes. So the worship service is we're worshiping, and Pete leads. Pete usually plucks the psalm from the Revised Common Lectionary, even if I'm not in the lectionary. I am at this point. And this Sunday's reading was from Psalm 1. Psalm 1 is a beatitude, and of course, some of the most famous beatitudes are Jesus' beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5. But whenever someone asks me about those beatitudes, I often recommend that they, in fact, look and check out the beatitudes in the Psalms, because when Jesus gives his beatitudes in Matthew, they should very much be contrasted with the beatitudes in the Psalms. So let's just take a little reading of Psalm 1. It's always difficult to know which translation you want to use, especially for Psalm 1. Maybe I'll just start with the NIV, just because it addresses some things. Blessed is the one. Now, if you grew up with the King James Version or the Revised Standard Version, you would have blessed is the man being generic man, and of course the NET, the New English translation, which is a good translation. It's got a lot of great notes. Notes that, well, oh, happiness of the man is a little bit more literal Hebrew. Blessed is the one. It's a beatitude. And what is a beatitude? A beatitude is a wisdom saying. And wisdom sayings are, we've been talking a lot about wisdom in our little corner of the internet. Wisdom sayings guide people in how they should act. They're not laws or rules, but they're generalities, they're guidance, and they're meant to be given generally, and then particular applications need to be made. Blessed is the one who does not follow the advice of the wicked, or stand in the pathway with sinners. Now, this is a rather famous phrase. This is the RSV, which is basically a mid 20th century updating of the authorized version, or the King James version, as depending on where you want to go with this. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners. Now, standing in the way of sinners, and so translations have been trying to get around that, and so the NIV says, "Blessed is the one," because it's trying to avoid when you say man. Well, I'm not a man. Blessed is the one. Okay, who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take. You see, the NIV is trying to make it a little bit more understandable to your average audience reading it today, or sit in the company of mockers. Now mockers is a category of person that you'll find fairly commonly in the book Proverbs. And Twitter might be the company of mockers, because that tends to be what our social media has wrought and brought forward. It's brought forward mockers. Now mockers are an interesting breed, because, and I certainly participate in this sometimes, because you sort of act like you know, but you don't have to actually know or even put up. All you have to do is mock, ridicule the other. So, blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord. Okay, well, what is the law of the Lord? Well, the law of the Lord, you can find it in the Torah. It's the first five books of Moses. This is their delight. That's just a lovely way. Their delight is in the law of the Lord. This is what they delight in. They love keeping this law. They love doing this law. Now remember, blessed is this is this, it's a makaroi. That's what we often call it in New Testament, because that's the Greek. It's happy is, or blessed is. This is what you do if you want to have a good life. Don't walk in step with the wicked. Don't stand in the way, stand in the road of, don't occupy the path of the sinners. Or don't sit among the mockers that are just, mocking people out there. That's pointless. It's fruitless. And already we have the wicked, the sinners, and the mockers. But delight is in the law, in fulfilling the law, and abiding by the law, and living by the law of the Lord, and who meditates on this law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water. Here in Sacramento, we have rivers and we have levees on those rivers, and it's a perpetual debate whether or not trees should be planted on those levees. Do they strengthen the levees with all of their roots, or do they weaken the levees with all of their roots? But trees are planted on the levees and they thrive because they're just take from the Sacramento River and the American River. They just keep drinking up all that water. And in a semi-arid Mediterranean climate, which Sacramento and California shares with the basically the eastern coast of the Mediterranean, water is very precious. And so the tree that has access to water all year round just thrives in comparison to the tree that doesn't. Like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Now, here's a metaphor. This person who delights in the law of the Lord and meditates on it day and night, they prosper. That's flourishing. And so clearly the law of the Lord is given for prospering. All right? Not so the wicked. They are like chaff. Now, if you take wheat, rice, almost any grain kernel, they have a husk on it, and brown rice still has the husk on it, and white rice has the husk taken off of it. And so you would separate the wheat from the chaff, and usually by throwing it up into the air or beating it and then throwing it up into the air, and the chaff blow away. So the wicked are like chaff. They blow away. They don't endure. And when I was reading it this week in the process of our worship service, I was thinking about Jordan Peterson's Darwinian theological knowledge. Because in a lot of ways, that's what Jordan Peterson sort of offers with his Darwinian approach to religion. That religion is this long-standing conversation by which we try to figure out who are the wicked and who is the righteous. What do wicked do? What do righteous do? What things produce flourishing and what things produce chaff-like living? And therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. Mockers aren't even involved. So the wickedness doesn't stand in the righteous judgment. Well, who's judging this rightly? Well, it's the law of the Lord. And now this is very, very common in the Hebrew Scriptures. This is a very common mindset in the Hebrew Scriptures. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. Now, part of what we'll talk about is personal versus impersonal. Psalm 1 is very personal, and it sets up this whole world, which is sort of like My Name is Earl, that old sitcom, and karma. Do good things, you receive good things. Do bad, you receive bad things. And that's sort of a general rule. Now Psalm 1 and Psalm 2 are quite closely connected, and they're the first psalms of the book of Psalms, which means that they sort of set the tone for the entire book. In Psalm 2, the application comes more down into the seculum via the king. Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth rise up and the rulers band together. Now, those of you who are familiar with Handel's Messiah will recognize this immediately. Psalm 2 is a very frequently quoted psalm in the New Testament with respect to Jesus. Jesus is seen as the fulfillment of this king that is anticipated in Psalm 2. The kings of the earth rise up and the rulers band together against the Lord and his anointed. The Lord's anointed is the King of Israel, saying, "Let us break their chains and throw off their shackles." The one enthroned in heaven laughs. But now, what's the scene here? Well, the rulers of the earth are under the dominion of the King of Israel. That's sort of the good. That's sort of the good that is anticipated here. The one enthroned in heaven laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. He rebukes them in his anger. And of course, this terribly troubles modern people because, God shouldn't act like this. He rebukes them in his anger and terrifies them in his wrath, saying, "I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. I will proclaim the Lord's decree. He said to me who? Well, to David. Psalm of David. Now, this isn't listed as a Psalm of David, but it's in anticipation of all of this. So the first Psalms in the book are the Psalms of David. This is the Davidic king. This is the king over Israel. Israel, who is primary among the nations. He said to me, "You are my son. Today I have become your father." And again, you can read about this in the book of Hebrews, because the book of Hebrews is this extended sermon or series of sermons that riffs on a lot of this stuff. "Ask me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession. You will break them with a rod of iron. You will dash them to pieces like a pottery." Now again, in Handel's Messiah, and he will lead his sheep like a shepherd. But that's a kingly metaphor. "Therefore, you kings, be wise. Be warned, you rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and celebrate his rule with trembling. Kiss his son, or he will be angry," because the king is the Son of God. And that's really important when you recognize all of the language of sonship around Jesus. The king is the Son of God. The king is the Son, is ruling here below, the Father that's ruling above. "For his wrath can flare up in a moment. Blessed are you who take refuge in him." Okay, so now there's blessed. So now the blessed at the end of Psalm 2 and the blessed at the beginning of Psalm 1 create this inclusio, as they talk about it in exegetical terms, saying this is one thought unit, but now it's in two psalms, and the two psalms are sort of a hinge. And here's the first psalm, which now I'll read them together and you'll get the whole picture. "Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, who meditates on this law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers." This is the blessed one. These are the wise ones. The wise ones read the law that the Lord has given through Moses on Sinai. They meditate by them. They live by them. And because they do that, their life flourishes. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff. They don't endure. They blow away. "Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment. When the judgment comes, the wicked will fail, because they're wicked. Nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. The righteous will show them out." Left hand. "For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction." Now, the question that looms over this is, really? Always? Because many times in the Hebrew prophets, you will find Hebrew prophets saying, "Now, wait a minute," and you'll find it in the Psalms. "Why do the wicked prosper? Why do the wicked prosper?" And the answer is always, just give it a little time, and in the end, you'll see. But time can go a long time, and ends can be a long ways, and this vision of Israel never comes to be. "Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth rise up and the rulers band together against the Lord and his anointed." It's an insurgence, saying, "Let us break their chains." Whose chains? The chains of Israel, and throw off their shackles. Let's it's a revolution. The one enthroned in heaven laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. He's the one doing the mocking. He rebukes them in his anger and terrifies them in his wrath, saying, "I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. The king will come down, and the king will administer justice on the earth." It's the job of the king. "I will proclaim the Lord's decree. He said to me, 'You are my son.'" Well, who's speaking now? Well, it's the king. "You are my son. Today I have become your father. Ask me, and I will make the nations your inheritance and the ends of the earth your possession." And you can see from a New Testament perspective why this so often gets quoted in the New Testament of Jesus, because this is Jesus' mission. Now, it's amazing that it gets quoted in the New Testament, which is written in the first century, and because it isn't till the 3rd century that Constantine comes along and, in a sense, makes it so. And Constantine then becomes the son. "You will break them with a rod of iron, and you will dash them to pieces like pottery. Therefore, you kings, be wise," because this is about wisdom. "Be warned, you rulers of the earth. Happy are you if you keep the law of the Lord and meditate on it day and night. Foolish are you if you rise up against him, because the king has a rod of iron, and he will smash you. Serve the Lord with fear, and celebrate his rule with trembling. Kiss his son, or he will be angry, and your way will lead to destruction. For his wrath can flare up in a moment. Blessed are all who take refuge in him." Now again, this strikes modern readers with a little bit of ambiguity, but I was very much thinking about Psalm 1 in the light of, well, to what degree are those who are right, do they win? Those who were right about the 2008 housing collapse, we always say things like, nobody knows. No, some people knew, and happy were they who had their money in the right place when the crash came. Happy were they who, when they saw Hitler elected, left Germany before the problem started. Happy were they who were able to get out of the Soviet Union. I mean, we perpetually live in this world where it calls for wisdom. And happy are you who can wisely manage your time and money and where you live and what your resources do, because you will prosper because of it. That's the general game the world plays. But Israel is perpetually in exile. And a lot of people say, well, what good that law is doing them. Job was the best man in the world, and he suffered. And then all the way to Jesus, the Son of God himself, crucified like an insurgent. The Romans would say, aha, what God is laughing now? Now, some people on the channel love to bring up natural law. Okay, what's the relationship between natural law and wisdom? Well, one might say that the wise pay attention to natural law and obey it. But notice again that the psalmist is very relational. And I think part of the reason people are so excited about natural law is, well, relationality requires maintenance. It requires sending gifts to the king. It requires giving the king your attention. It requires paying attention and being a part of that network. Law is usually just a little bit separated. So, well, here are the laws, and it's law sort of keeps me in the driver's seat. And I think this is part of the reason why we like this natural law. I think we also like natural law ideas and formulations because of deism, because of part of what has happened from the 16th century on is that increasingly we have imagined the world to be impersonal, not fundamentally personal. That's where you have sort of my ideas about God number one and God number two. Now, I think part of what we see in the Psalms, and you find very similar ideas among many other religions in the world, is what I sort of call natural religion. Because this is the common project that human beings have been working on for as long as we've had records of human civilization. It's very karmic. Do the right thing and you'll be blessed. Do the wrong thing and you'll pay. Now, of course, if you have a meta-divine realm, you look for champions of the gods that you can relationally approach and submit to in hopes that your champion they'll be your patron. They'll be your patron, and you can be their supplicant. And that's how you make life work in the ancient world. And those kinds of ideas continue in many places of the world. When I lived in the Dominican Republic, everybody understood who a patron was. And, in some ways, Peter Thiel is the patron of Eric Weinstein. Brett Weinstein lost his patron when he lost his job, so now he's sort of out there on his own. For a while, Jordan Peterson was the patron of Dave Rubin. Jordan Peterson was the heavy, and Dave Rubin sort of cuts his wake behind him. In some ways, Barack Obama was the patron of Joe Biden, and now we'll see what happens in the Republican Party, where Donald Trump is the patron of a lot of other Republicans that are hoping to make their way up. Having a patron or a patron is a very well-established path of making your way up in a relational world among relational creatures. So natural law, well, what's the relationship between the law of the Lord, as is seen in Psalm 1, and natural law? Well, one of the big differences is that in Psalm 1 and 2, it's very clear that, being has agency, and relationality with respect to that being matters. And I think this is actually one of the big dividing lines that lurks beneath a lot of the Christian, non-Christian conversations that we have now. I think a lot say, that relationality tax is really pointless. Going to church is time-consuming, worship is time-consuming, prayer seems pointless. What really matters is action. And action does really matter. You get to the book of Job, of course, and it throws skepticism on how well we can do the math. And what we seldom think of is that, this natural law is embedded within religion. It comes from religion. And so all of this attempt that I think we find in modernity to try to strip away the relationality from natural law, it's kind of telling. But the book of Job comes along and basically says, can you really do the math? Can you really accomplish this? And yet we all need to navigate. And so then I think in many ways, at least in the secular realm, the debate about religion is, what's the relationality tax? And how much do I have to pay? And is relationality really worth it? Now, moderns are squeamish about relationality. And, I haven't had a chance to really go through the Ian McGilchrist, Jordan Peterson conversation. But, this I come back around to this conversation often. I had in 2018 or 19, I had a conversation with John Vervaeke about this. And this is where I postulated my spirit of finesse versus the spirit of geometry, sort of following from Pascal. Because if you listen to someone like McGilchrist and Peterson, the modern assumption is that the world is impersonal, and so all that religious relationality is sort of wasted effort. But then you listen to these guys and you begin to say, is our world finally personal or impersonal? I think part of the trick that Jordan Peterson sort of played in all of his work is that he keeps bringing those two things together. And he basically says, the personal has been around, the relational has been around for so long, it's actually been built now into our physiology, and it's built now into our psychology, both the hardware and the software, that in many ways the answer is unimportant. Now, this Peterson, who doesn't double down in terms of formal religion. Although if you listen to him, he's very much like a lot of non-churchgoers that I know that say, well, they're a Christian, they believe in God, they pray, they do all these things, but it's sort of a backyard religion. Now, backyard religion doesn't get good treatment in the book of Judges, because in many ways, the book of Judges is all about backyard religion, because everybody has a shrine in their backyard. Everybody, you maybe find a priest who can administer things for you. And basically, the picture from the book of Judges is pretty poor. So, maybe Jordan in his biblical series should pay a little bit more attention to Judges. And maybe he'll be skeptical about it. But the entire approach to the Bible and what sort of Jordan Peterson's contribution is that he says, all of this stuff is really big and we can't really do the math on it very well. So you ignore the Bible at your peril. And so one might say, Jordan, you ignore the book of Judges at your peril. Is our world finally impersonal or personal? And someone left a really interesting comment in one of my videos that basically said that this is one of these cruxes that Hindu theology has always sort of teetered on. They could never make up their mind on it, and I would very much understand that to be correct. Now, of course, Christianity and Judaism doubles down on the personal and finally says, blessed are you that relate to the world personally, to being personally, to the universe personally, that ask questions of it. And you do find, in fact, with Jordan Peterson's backyard religion, that he relates to the universe personally. Now, of course, one of the interesting things about McGilchrist is that he notes the left brain and the right brain, and because I'm dyslexic, I've always got problems with the left and the right. But the left brain is sort of grasping and manipulating and boiling things down, and you really need that. But the right brain is open-ended. And you need that too. In fact, you always need both in order to manage this world. And then, of course, questions will arise. Well, what can this tell us about being itself, about the nature of reality? And, well, it can tell us something. To me, it goes back to the spirit of finesse over geometry. We relate to the world with a posture of relating to things too complex for you to do the math on. And as the point I made in that video, I should probably put a link to it. I looked for the thumbnail, but I didn't want to spend all kinds of time looking for it. That's actually the appropriate way to treat human beings, and it's the appropriate way to it's sort of been built into the scientific method. This sort of posture towards skepticism. You talk to another human being not like you know them through and through, but like there's a lot you don't know, and so you should treat them with respect. And at heart, that's a lot of what the spirit of finesse is. Now, this morning I woke up and because of the difference in English time and California time, Tom Holland was active on Twitter while I was sleeping and got into a fun little Twitter conversation about human rights, and this has a lot to do with his book, Dominion. Human rights aren't objectively true either. So he's responding to a tweet. Okay, but my problem with basing human rights on religion is that religion is not actually objectively true, so you're building a house on sand. Now, this was a big, fat, slow pitch. Well, I don't know what that means in cricket terms, but this is something that Tom Holland's going to be all over, because Tom Holland's point is that human rights is downstream from Christianity. And what I found really interesting about his tweet was he put it on the resurrection. Human rights aren't objectively true either. You don't find human rights. Look at my conversation with Sevilla. You don't find human rights. You don't dig it up in the backyard and find it in the dirt. You don't. How can you find it? It's not something concrete. And this is where this language of objectivity is really a failure. It's not, human rights is not a physical thing. Okay. Now you might say, well, it's in the information, but once we're into that realm, it's very different from a physical thing. They derive from profoundly Christian theological presumptions. They are quite as culturally contingent as a belief in Christ's resurrection. Culturally contingent. And that's the fear, because what if we stop? They are in our intersubjective. And the question is, is there moral gravity beyond human culture? And the posture of modernity is that you can get away with it. If you get to, like Mao, if you get to slide off into the grave, to shuffle off this mortal coil, and you had the benefits of ruling with an iron fist the world's largest country population-wise, Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, you get away with it. Now, of course, Christian narratives say, no, you don't get away with it, because Psalm 2, the Lord will call you to account. And now, the way that this is manifest is, of course, in an afterlife. And that's what Christianity has been promoting all over. Other religions have promoted very similar things. You have the Book of the Dead in Egypt, and so there's all this discussion of an afterlife. The only thing we can work on these is by the only way we can work on these is by thinking about outcomes. And that's where you imagine punishment. And of course, a lot of people are like, no, not punishment. Well, punishment's pretty hard to get around, whether with natural religion. Hence, you have stories of karma and punishment and consequences. So, either Mao got away with it or he didn't. Now, is Mao suffering in an afterlife for eternity or in eternity? Duration gets a little difficult for us to think about in eternity. So that gets into all kinds of other debated topics. But this is obviously vitally important for people. And again, I bring in Miroslav Volf's observation in the deconstruction of Yugoslavia when it was all coming apart. He noted that secularists, atheists, well, if there's going to be punishment, it's going to happen here. And I think this is part of what is fueling the fact that in wokeness there is no forgiveness, because you don't have the expanded room that an afterlife affords for, nor do you have a judging God that can decree punishment or blessings. So blessed is the way, blessed is the one who ponders on the day of the Lord, ponders on the law of the Lord and meditates on it day and night. And, now in terms of the Old Testament period, Sheol was sort of a fuzzy, Hades was sort of fuzzy, but you see in, let's say, Lazarus and the rich man, some differentiation. Of course, that gets full-blown in the book of Daniel when you have a resurrection, of course, and that will continue to develop into Christianity. So there's a lot going on here. Now, then I'm having a conversation with Esther and the Common Toad. Now, the Common Toad was on my channel, and we had a terrific conversation. Maybe we should do another one. He interviewed me, and for a while I had it posted on the masthead of my channel. It was an excellent interview, I thought. But he asked this question in the context of this conversation. Would you see a moral difference in a person who owned a slave in ancient Rome versus a person living amongst us in the United States owning one? And right there, we're asked to do moral math. And, part of what Esther had weighed in with 2 + 2 is 4, and I made the comment, it seems time is integral in these questions of morality. Because one would say, well, in order for your bridge to last, you need to use math. And so you have math and physics. It's very immediate. Now, we see often with shoddy manufacturing or no building standards that it's not quite so immediate. Time still makes its point and has its toll to tell, or tell to toll, something like that. But what if the time reference for moral math is very different? Now, the difficulty you have with a question like this, which was my answer to him, how would you measure such a thing? Do you measure morality in grams? Do you measure it in inches? Do you measure it in... We can't even quantify suffering. We sort of have greater and worse, but that's about as far as we can get. On what stage, could you compare them? So here you have someone in the Roman world owning a slave, let's say someone in antebellum America owning a slave, and then let's say there was an article not too long ago in the Atlantic with a woman thinking about the fact that they had in her home growing up another woman who was functionally a slave. And, living in Latin America with a patron, often families of poverty will give a son or a daughter to a wealthy family and say, here. And sort of the agreement is, well, feed them, clothe them, maybe educate them, maybe treat them like a son. But what they do as they're growing up and as where they're living in the house is run around and pick up the laundry and do the dishes, and they're not getting paid for that labor directly. They're getting clothing. And so the question in that particular Atlantic article was this woman a slave? And then, of course, she got older and then needed expensive medical care. And then the family's kind of like, well, now we want to switch to the wage system, even though you haven't paid her any wage. And so, kick her out on the street and let her family or the government or someone else pay for it. And so these things aren't, how do you compare these systems? They're separated by huge cultural divides. Such questions are punted to God because presumably only he could do the math and have access to both individuals. If there is no God, dyslexic, if there is on God, no. If there is no God, then what is left of the question? It's an interesting intellectual question, but so what? Who cares? The Romans got away with it. Most of the antebellum slave owners got away with it. They all get away with it. It's the way this world does. Okay, no more getting away with it. Now, and now what? Tyranny? We can decide these matters? Blessed is the man who does not sit in the counsel of the wicked, or occupy the path, live in the path of the sinners, or sit in the assembly of the mockers, but who delights in the law of the Lord. Well, is that like natural law? What kind of law are we talking about? You see, these things have a grip on us together, and part of Jordan Peterson's argument about lobsters and brain chemistry and such is that, well, they have status. Well, enslaving people now, it's going to get you in trouble. And this is sort of Tom Holland's argument when people wade in and say, what about those Christians? And Tom Holland's like, the measuring stick, you use a Christian measuring stick to measure the Christians and say Christianity is invalid. Then your measuring stick is invalid. That's your problem, but we don't see it. Language is always sort of tracking this sort of thing. Religion has been the longest conversation trying to track it. I was just this morning finished up the Rest is History Aztecs. And you need to struggle to know exactly what the bridge is. Now, this bridge that you needed math and physics to make, because it isn't obvious either. Listen to the Aztec episode of The Rest is History. So the Aztecs were famous in saying, well, the world is going to end, and now that's questionable now too because of further scholarship. But did the Aztecs' world end when the Spanish came? Depends what you mean by their world. For individuals, they all have their own separate world. My world ended when I got the diagnosis with cancer. Well, what did you mean by the world? Well, this life that I was living, free from care, not having the pain of chemo, having extra income, able to do these things. My life ended when my city gave up to the Roman armies and we all became slaves. That's how Roman law worked. If your city lost the battle and you became a slave, well, guess what? Your marriage is over. It's done. Why? Because you're a dead man. Because you're a non-human. So I'm not a dead man because usually if you lose the battle, you have a choice. Either we can kill you or you can be our slave. But in either way, you're sort of classified as dead. And this is where we get into these ancient notions of the people and the non-people, the barbarians, the Gentiles, the people who aren't people because they're not in our category and therefore can be enslaved. And again, we use a Christian yardstick to measure Christians in past eras, but thanks for the yardstick, I'm going to judge you with it. Judge not, lest you be not judged, because the yardstick, the measure that you use, will be used against you. It seems to be exactly what we're doing to each other. Everyone is trying to save the world, but what exactly do we mean with this term? And the atheists, especially individualistic atheists, that they're in bigger trouble with these arguments than anyone, because for the most part, me is just me, and when they put me in the ground and cover me with dirt, that's it. So a lot of the variables in the way we talk, they're all part of this yardstick that we've inherited. So then we're down to this question, how do I live? And if you haven't caught my conversation with Sevilla, I thought that was an outstanding conversation. But that's what Peterson keeps coming back to the skeptics. And Peterson keeps saying, well, we sort of live by these rules because we don't have anything better. And the measure and the yardstick we're using is also from these rules. But you still have to make a choice as you live. The good and the bad, what has value. Of course, that's Sevilla and the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Persig. What is right and wrong. This stuff is built into us so incredibly deeply. And so that's where I sit and ponder as we're reading through the Psalm of the day. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that blows away. Well, do you want your life to count? What does counting look like? Well, in a lot of ways, what human beings have done is, we propagate our genetics, Genghis Khan, or we propagate our ideas, Jesus Christ. Whose system works better, Genghis Khan or Jesus Christ? 300-400 million people have Genghis Khan's DNA running through their body? They didn't know about it. They didn't care. Well, billions of people seem to have Jesus Christ's teaching DNA running through their value hierarchies. They don't know about it. They don't care. But how should you live? Well, in a lot of ways, it's interesting because the New Testament very much posits a judgment, and it's always dependent on what we do. But that's not all. It's always two things. It's what we do and our relational network. So these relational networks are really enduring. And if you thinking about, this is Sunday leftover, so I'm thinking about my sermon. And my sermon was all about, we've got all these different cosmologies with Ascension Day. Relationality seems to be the thing that cuts through. And that's where I really land on the spirit of finesse. What is wisdom? Relate personally to the universe. Well, the problem with that is, and let's bring in some good Vervaeke solvent, there's a lot of BS that you can do in there, and we see it all the time. But I don't think finally approaching the universe with the spirit of geometry can cut it. I think you have to approach the universe with the spirit of finesse. And I think the human tools that do that are, in fact, the relational tools. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Not so the wicked. They're like chaff. Their genetics, they got none, or they're uninteresting. Their ideas, these things that we pour into the world, they just blow away. It's basically heresy. It's the ideas that can't endure. It's the ways of being that can't endure. It's all of this that can't endure. Therefore the sinner will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watch over, again, relationality. For the Lord watches over the ways of the righteous, but the ways of the wicked lead to destruction. Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth rise up, and the rulers band together against the Lord, against his anointed, saying, Let us break their chains and throw off their shackles. The one enthroned in heaven laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. He rebukes them in his anger and terrifies them in his wrath, saying, I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. I will proclaim the Lord's decree. He said to me, You are my son. Today I am your father. Ask me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession. You will break them with a rod of iron. You will dash them to pieces like pottery. Therefore, you kings, be wise. Be warned, you rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and celebrate his rule with trembling. Kiss his son, or he will be angry, and your way will lead to destruction. For his wrath can flare up in a moment. Blessed are you who take refuge in him.